A lot
The
there.
Georgia election reform law, the Texas election reform law, the worst challenges to our democracy since the Civil War. Well, that's a statement. For a reaction to that and deeper discussion on this topic, pleased to be joined again by Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General of Virginia and acting Deputy Secretary of Department of Homeland Security under President Trump. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you all.
Would you say that Jen Psaki is being a bit dramatic?
That would be the mild version of it. Ironically enough, if you want to talk about the greatest threat to democracy, it was the worst domestic terrorist organization in American history, the Democrat Party's Ku Klux Klan of the late 1800s, that actually killed people and actually drove thousands away from voting and registering to vote and so forth, as civil rights laws receded in the South. And look, I was an attorney general for a pre-clearance state, Virginia, before the Shelby County decision. I'm quite practiced at having to go through the Justice Department, and I can tell you that, as the Supreme Court said in that case, the times have changed, and that's a good thing. We are not the nation we were in 1965. We do not have tests and hurdles in place based on your race for people to vote. So and by the way, the turnout reflects it. If you look at this last election, there were only two states where you had both higher black voter registration than white and higher black turnout than white. They were Mississippi and Tennessee. The worst state by far on those measures was Massachusetts. So maybe she should get on Massachusetts a little bit, and the president ought to go to Boston instead of going to Pennsylvania on these things. But nobody buys the hyperbole. It's very interesting that after 6 months of libelous attacks on things like voter ID, which ordinary Americans who don't really care much about politics sort of shrug their shoulders and say, of course we should do voter ID. Why are you asking me that question? That needle hasn't moved, and the radical left is not used to this.
Yeah,
When they and their media allies weigh in, they're used to being able to move the needle.
But on voter ID, what is the Republican plan to provide photocopying services to rural voters so that they can submit their ID and their mail-in ballot?
Well, with your voter ID, you will get a free Kinko's card.
Yay!
Hey, all right, fine.
Well,
See?
you have to show an
Like
ID.
gifts.
You have to show an ID to get a COVID vaccine, to get on a plane.
And to get the Kinko's card.
Yeah, to get the. I mean.
So you're not concerned, like
Well,
Kamala
but
Harris is
Amy,
about rural
that's
voters?
Yeah, I am confident in rural voters, unlike Kamala Harris, who's never met one. Amy, I think that what you see when you see, and we did in Virginia, when you see voter ID requirements put in place, people are careful to make sure they are available. I mean, in Virginia, we used mobile units. Alabama did this to be able to drive to people. And the other side, I remember when one lady, she's like 92 years old, was a plaintiff in Pennsylvania, suing, I can't get a voter ID, and they lost the case. The next day, she went and got an ID.
And follow the rules.
Follow the rules, except, of course, for stupid rural people that Kamala Harris has never met. But this is easy to overcome, and we're at a point in history, and we should be proud of this fact. And they want to turn history around, that it's easier to register to vote and to vote than it's ever been, no matter what race you are and no matter where you live. And that was the idea behind the Voting Rights Act. It worked. It fixed the problem. And their attempts to use alleged discrimination, which doesn't exist in any scale like it did in 1965, is not working on the American people, because it isn't true. They're just flat out lying. I mean, how Jen Psaki says things like you all just played with a straight face, I don't know.
Well, there is a disconnect, though. I mean, there's you asked me the voter ID question, and I give you this answer, but then I don't like Trump or I don't like the Republican Party, so Jen Psaki engaged in demagoguery like you heard. That also works on me, because if it didn't work, Why would you see the performative art of these Texas legislators getting on a private plane to flee the state so as to block passage of election reforms in Texas? I mean, there's got to be some constituency these individuals are serving.
Well, there's a simple human answer to it, and it is look at the coverage they got. They're all happy to see themselves in every newspaper across the country. And they get their 15 minutes of fame, as did their case of light beer from Miller that they brought with them, if you saw the Twitter reports yesterday. And they probably needed an ID to get that,
Exactly.
by the way.
Yes.
But, and you don't really need to look farther than that. The polling in Texas on their first walkout was that only 27% of Texans supported what they did. And that was the first go around. And again, when people learn that what they walked out on was equalizing voter ID requirements for mail-in voting with in-person voting, the sympathy level drops through the floor for these folks.
And
it's a publicity stunt, and they're kissing up to the radical left, who they're afraid of in their primaries.
Besides voter ID, I mean, what other points of contention do they have? The 24-hour voting, or they want more drop boxes, drive-through? What is it? Or is it all of those?
It varies state by state, but if you look at S1, their federal everything bill, the takeover bill, they want automatic mail-outs of ballots to the last address of every voter, which just floods the country with ballots. It's a security nightmare, and it's a problem in the states that do it already. They want same-day voter registration, which a lot of states have said we just can't do that, and meaning they can't logistically pull it off, including Joe Manchin's West Virginia, which is kind of important given his role in all this. And by the way, Joe Manchin was a Secretary of State, so he's had some personal experience with some of this. And then they want to forcibly register everybody on your state databases. And this is a clever way to get illegal aliens and non-citizens registered to vote, and they know that. So in the same bill, they took away, I kid you not, they took away federal felonies, for non-citizens voting.
Oh, my God.
And they added felonies for any state employees who they use very vaguely worded language, impede or question, if you will, anyone getting registered to vote. So if you're state employee Fred and you're about to dump a database onto the voter rolls and you scratch your head and say, but we serve this massive immigrant community, this will have a lot of immigrants on it, they threaten to come after you for criminal prosecution if you hold up the data dump. And of course the result is you end up with millions of non-citizens on the voter rolls, and you've taken away penalties for them voting. That's what they want to do. It's unbelievable.
And then you go next level, which Dana Nussel, the Attorney General of Michigan, she's already there, which is to investigate anyone who makes a claim of election fraud. So now,
that's right. Well, the Department of Justice, it isn't just Michigan. When DOJ is threatening Arizona over their audit, first of its kind in the country, voter suppression. I have yet to figure out how you suppress voters after an election. Unless you might consider it to be incompetent voter suppression. But that's the legal authority which DOJ is claiming to be able to take a look at the audit is voter suppression and protecting against it. And by the way, it should go without saying that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which gives the federal government the authority to attack actual discrimination in voting practices, is a perfectly legitimate authority for the federal government to have. Discriminate with 10,000 election jurisdictions more than, there's always going to be some level of discrimination, and in every direction. We've reached the point in our history, I guess this is a measure of how far things have come, that any group of people can discriminate against any other group, and it does happen in every direction. And so the authority needs to exist to correct it, but it does. So what Joe Biden's talking about is these two new bills, which would be a complete federal takeover and put the states in a mother may I position, every single state, with the Department of Justice. And if you look at who they employ in the voting rights section, It's former ACLU lawyers. It's the radical left lawyers who literally just come in out of their day jobs and execute them instead of as lawyers. They become judges of a sort in the Department of Justice, and that's who they're hiring.
And we also have this story that the Federalist broke on Friday that recently obtained evidence indicates more than 10,300 Georgia voters, a number that is not static, may grow, voted illegally in 2020. And this is not some elaborate scheme. They voted illegally based on a look at National Change of Address database and the requirement in Georgia law that in order to vote in the county in which they reside, they have to have changed their residence. Yeah, within 30 days of the election. They have to be a registered voter within 30 days of the election. And they're looking at some 35,000 voters that may have relocated only temporarily. And right now, one estimate, 10,300 Georgia voters voted illegally in a state that Trump lost by 12,000 votes. So
is Andrew Yang on that list?
I don't know.
Remember, he moved to Georgia.
But here again, we're thinking about this prospectively and saying, this is about competent administration. This is not partisan. Right. This is not conspiracy theory. It's competent administration.
That's right. And I mean, remember the biggest election debacle that we all agree on, Bush v. Gore in 2000. I mean, Florida was held up in front of the whole world as a complete sad joke of an election system. Bad machines, bad counting, rules applied differently in different places, incompetent people. There was no real allegation of fraud down there, but the election was run so badly, it certainly shook Americans' confidence in the outcome of the election. And what did Florida do? Because the federal government didn't get in the way, they set about cleaning up their election system. They fired some of their poor performing folks and hired good ones. And we fast forward 20 years after a number of years of improving their system, the third largest state, the largest swing state, was done counting smoothly on election night with no complaints from either side. It ran very well, even in a difficult year with COVID concerns roiling the waters. And so it can be done. It can be done at the state level. And if anybody seriously thinks the federal government's going to do a better job actually designing and running elections, then I've got a bridge in Arizona. I'll sell you.
It's probably named after John McCain, right? I want to get before we let you go your explanation of this new joint you're doing along with Marjorie Dannenfelser, Susan B. Anthony List, and our friend Terry Schilling at American Principles Project. This election transparency initiative that you're leading. Just describe what the purpose is.
Yeah, it's at electiontransparency.org, and it's a joint project of the Susan B. Anthony List, the biggest pro-life group out there, and American Principles Project, pro-family, social conservative group, who believe that when elections are fair and free, they get to make their case and they win. And the progress of the pro-life movement is good evidence of that. And so they have a real interest in turning us loose, me and Michael Barr, the executive director, to work on election integrity at both the state and federal level. They bring over 1 million members between them to bear in a grassroots fashion, talking to congressmen and senators with already existing relationships. And so it's been a great effort, been very successful, and we've been able to participate as part of the leadership and the conservative movement across the country as we look to make Americans' elections better than they've been and good enough that Americans in every state, regardless of party or race, can have confidence in the outcome of our elections, regardless of whether your candidate wins or loses.
Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General of Virginia and acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump. Ken, thanks as always. Appreciate it.